UrbanTalk would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. We recognise and we celebrate our continued connection to country, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Planning Congress podcast. In partnership with the Planning Institute of Australia, UrbanTalk is once again hosting a special podcast series in the lead up to the 2025 National Planning Congress that will take place in Darwin, Garramilla country, between May 28 and 30. Through this podcast, we will bring you interviews with key local and international speakers so that you can get a taste of what to expect at Congress. My name is Belinda Barnett and I am the podcast host. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Tim Muster, who is a Principal Research Scientist with the CSIRO, Australia's national science agency. Tim leads the CSIRO's Urban Living Lab initiative, which seeks to create a portfolio of innovation precincts that encourage real-world experimentation and learning. At Congress, Tim is speaking on accelerating sustainability and resilience in our cities, towns and regional settlements. Welcome, Tim. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Belinda.
I am sure that delegates will be very familiar with the CSIRO, but they may not be aware of the incredible work that you are doing with the Urban Living Labs program. So what I'd like to do in this podcast is to highlight the key aspects of your work so delegates understand how important it is and they don't miss your keynote address at Congress. To get our discussion started, can you tell me what the CSIRO considers to be the most urgent urban challenges Australian cities need to address?
Well, Belinda, I'd just like to start by saying that by and large, Australian cities and suburbs are actually pretty damn good. So many of our cities regularly feature as high performing when it comes to the international benchmarking of livability, for example. And we also need to acknowledge, that our cities are economic powerhouses. They're where we do things, they're where we live. And we know that 80% of the global GDP is generated by cities. So however you raise the issue around challenges that our cities are dealing with, and they are increasing, and the urgent ones are mainly around sustainability and resilience issues. So our cities and our living patterns consume a large amount of resources. So that's our built and material footprints as well as energy and water. And it's important to realise that cities around the world consume around 75% of global resources and a similar proportion of global energy consumption. So that means our cities are responsible for a lot of the extraction of raw materials and the production of greenhouse gas emissions. So the global sustainability challenge won't be met without taking action within our cities and suburbs. The other key factor is a changing climate. So where we're challenged by increasing pressure and disruptions around natural hazards. So many of our Australian cities are facing, increased frequency of the duration of extreme heat events, and storms and flooding events are becoming more severe. So this means building more resilience into the way that cities are planned, and also in many cases replanning or reimagining following disasters, or even better, like preempting any climate-related risks ahead of disaster. So there's a long list of other challenges. Just a few examples. So maybe, a growing national population with no clearly defined settlement strategy. There's declining housing affordability, issues around access to green space, protection of natural systems, and the health burden due to, sedentary lifestyles, for example. So to summarise, there's lots of challenges, and our research suggests that many of these challenges are interrelated or interconnected. So we need to look at how we can change the system or the system of systems rather than look at isolated issues.
It's interesting. We often bring architects and urban designers and economists and demographers to the table when we're making urban policy. But it seems to me we need to be bringing scientists into the conversation at that stage as well. What role can science play in the process of urban development and renewal?
Science is always seeking to understand situations in greater detail and with more rigour, so collecting data, analysing, and importantly, science always shares their learnings and issues are debated. So what you end up with by involving scientists is greater evidence to make better decisions. So CSIRO as our national science agency, so we're certainly in the business of providing trusted advice through delivering robust science. And so to do this in the urban context, which, as I said before, is a complex area of science, it's really important to collaborate across disciplines. So learning how to appreciate different knowledge sets and interests. This is how we start to understand the larger system context by working with planners, economists, government approvers and alike. And so hopefully by doing this, we can bring more credible knowledge to the urban policy renewal process. And with respect to what science can do in the process of urban development and renewal, there's a number of roles it can play. You can conduct more traditional research, such as modeling the performance outcomes of a certain design. But what we've been trying to do is increase the rate of experimentation and real world testing of new urban innovations. The way we've been sort of approaching this is essentially to roll up our sleeves and get out of the office and into the real world. So looking to work with real people in real situations to try and instigate change in those places.
Yeah, I think it was when we were preparing for the podcast, really interesting how you were, I guess, emphasizing and explaining to me the opportunities that greenfield development presents, particularly in driving innovation, because it allows you to have this level of experimentation that you're just talking out without constraints of existing infrastructure. And you identified, I guess, 5 key strategic actions you apply for fostering innovation in greenfield projects. Can you walk us through these five key steps?
Yeah, so we've conducted some research, which is really looking at answering the question of how we get more innovation into urban planning and development. So how to overcome the barriers and what could enable the uptake of more innovation. So at the end of the research, we kind of came up with 5 actions, as you said. So the first one was to find ways to identify and select solutions that outcompete business as usual options. So essentially it's saying, like, let's create the conditions where there's a high emphasis put on doing things different. The second key action was to create platforms that enable co-innovation with communities and government departments and elected officials. So that's really sort of looking at the human-centric, approach, and also, the governance approach to, designing things in a different way. Third one was to create engagement campaigns that demonstrate the need for innovation and also the need for altered urban forms to actually be delivered. So the importance of, of working towards, a net zero or a circular economy, and we can't just keep doing the, living and building, the same things. That's just not going to work for solving these challenges. And the fourth one's around creating ecosystems that allow firms and agencies to collaborate and undertake cross-sector innovation. So that's really sort of looking at industry and services and utilities and making sure they can work together. And the last one was really to establish a semi-government innovation authority, one that had the sort of, the real sort of backing to guide and fund innovation towards longer term public policy outcomes. So you're really sort of looking at, those things that are actually hard to normally get funded. But the things that as people, and our environment and our biodiversity outcomes that we're always kind of striving for. So in short, what the research points towards is a small number of government supported urban innovation zones. So these are actual places where there's effort focused on encouraging cross-sector collaboration, the co-development of innovations and the trialling of new solutions. Now, we argue that greenfield sites typically have less lock-in effects and are better suited to try more radical innovations. So, for example, you could potentially prioritise, active transport or implement a driverless bus system with greater freedom in a greenfield as opposed to, an urban renewal precinct.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I guess this is where your Urban Living Lab program comes in, because it is all, isn't it? That the program that you are heading up is all about combining this scientific expertise with real world problem solving. And I think you've got 3 living labs that are being developed currently. You've got one being the Sydney Science Park in Western Sydney, one in Darwin, and another is in planning in Canberra, which is the Ginninderra Lab. I know at Congress, our delegates are going to be able to visit the Darwin Lab to get a first-hand look, which is going to be very exciting.
Yeah, we've been, undertaking work in the Darwin Living Lab since 2019, so it'll be a good chance to share some of our learnings throughout the Congress, for sure.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see it. I'm really excited about it. I guess, in my head, home builders, I guess, showcase their designs in display parks. So to me, when I think about the Urban Living Labs, it almost sounds like a display park for urban innovation projects. I'm not sure if I've got that right. So maybe it's best for you to exactly explain what is meant by the term an urban living lab.
I'll do my best. And you're kind of right about the display part, but I might come back to that. I should firstly say that the term urban living lab was introduced by European researchers around 2010. They were looking to find ways to achieve sustainability outcomes in cities, which is kind of similar to what we're looking for. And on the back of our own research, we've arrived at our own version of what an urban living lab is. But essentially, it's a designated place that creates a platform for collaboration, for urban experimentation and for learning. So the Sydney Science Park CSIRO Urban Living Lab is a partnership with private developer Celestino in Western Sydney, and the lab sits within the remit of Sydney Science Park, which is a 311 hectare mixed-use development, approximately 3 kilometres to the north, the soon-to-be open Western Sydney International Airport. It's not so much a building, but the context is that 311 hectare development. And similarly, the context of the Darwin Living Lab is the City of Darwin local government area. So our research and collaboration focuses in this case on an area that's 111 square kilometres. And so in this case, it's a CSIRO-led collaboration with the City of Darwin, Northern Territory and Commonwealth Government. So it's more that sort of broader spatial remit to tackle the more systemic challenges within our cities. And it's worth mentioning that they're long-term commitments between partners, so at least 10 years. And this is important because we're trying to attempt to increase local capacity to do things differently. So finding ways to work across sectors and across jurisdictions and upskilling by learning and building on each other's knowledge. And also, I guess we're in the business of sharing outcomes. So we hope that the advances in the CSIRO Urban Living Labs can be taken up more broadly and hence achieve national outcomes. To come back to your initial question, so yes, we encourage new designs to be built and displayed within the context of our labs. Some of our work in the labs has involved bringing scientific rigour to design processes, for buildings and, other planning issues, and a critical role really for science to play, based on your sort of imagination of, a display home put somewhere. The role would be to monitor and evaluate the new design and how they're implemented. So to assess their actual performance and to share the outcomes to a wider audience.
That's fantastic. So with the work that's been done to date, have you been able to orchestrate or change any actual urban policy at either like a local government level or a state government level?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we've been able to do is really work in the strategy space quite effectively. So we've been able to, for example, in Darwin, co-develop a heat mitigation and adaptation strategy, with the Commonwealth, the Northern Territory and City of Darwin. So within that comes certain, I guess, actions that, we become responsible for because we have a long-term partnership. We can actually be built into a forward strategy. Look, there's been some sort of changes in working closely with the City of Darwin, and whether it's, whether we can claim any impact or not, but, sort of reductions of car speeds through the city and reclaiming some, asphalt space and changing that to space that supports tree shade canopy to be developed. But sort of working with partners, particularly in their strategies, is where we've really been able to sort of find some traction.
And can, say, developers bring a problem to you that may need a scientific solution? Is that happening at all, or can it happen?
Yeah, that's certainly happened in the context of the Sydney Science Park Urban Living Lab. The developers are, preparing their kind of plans and strategies, and effectively that looks like a problem statement, that's shared within, the collaboration of the Urban Living Lab. And so as a national science agency, we're well connected with other research providers in, local universities, within New South Wales and Sydney. And so we'll look to kind of bring, the different sort of, I guess, expertise in, and, that not sort of confined to the research space, because there's industry solutions that are out there. So that's one mechanism that we've certainly put in place and used.
Do the labs generally each have a different research focus?
Yes, they do. So effectively every place is unique. And yes, they do have a different research focus. The Sydney Science Park is a greenfield development, whereas the Darwin Living Lab set in an occupied city, and it features some aspects of renewal, as well as doing things fresh. Sydney Science Park allows us to test a developer-led precinct and how that differs, in trying to get more innovation into play, whereas the Darwin Living Lab has a much stronger government focus. So I guess that's, we find that interesting as researchers, where we can actually understand, the interactions between government and industry a bit better. In terms of the challenges, for example, Darwin and Western Sydney both have challenges around urban heat and increasing extreme heat events. Darwin has the additional factor of high humidity to deal with. They both have challenges around water, around energy, transport, air quality, waste. So the list of challenges appears to be the same, but the context can be very different. So, within different climates, different population densities, remoteness, demographics and culture, it all comes into the differences that you actually see. And it's really sort of combining, that expert sort of, knowledge and expertise with the local knowledge. And that's where that sort of longer term, sort of understanding, really sort of digging into problems and sharing the knowledge. I think that's where we've really found some wins, and you figure out where the challenges and where the barriers are. And sometimes they're not easy to overcome, but that longer term working in a place allows you to try and deal with some of those, whether it's an institutional challenge or whether it's a public health education challenge, or, those sorts of issues.
What is the CSIRO's vision for the Urban Living Lab program? Do you envisage the labs being rolled out across Australia, and will you take the concept global?
So our vision is to build greater innovation capacity into Australia's urban planning and development industry. So that means more collaboration, more co-design across institutions, more on-the-ground experimentation, increased data collection of performance in the real world, and to share those learning outcomes along with that, and ultimately wider uptake of robust approaches nationally. The tangible outcome that we're looking for is demonstrable improvements in livability, sustainability, and resilience. And in terms of rolling out globally, we're sharing information openly as we go. So who knows at this stage? We'd like to think that what we're doing in our CSIRO Urban Living Labs program is unique and will continue to attract global interest. There's certainly, I guess, many, global interactions that we've had, to date, and who knows where it'll end up.
A big focus of the Congress this year is housing and how we can all work together effectively to deliver smart housing outcomes. How is the Urban Living Lab program informing smart residential development?
There's different avenues to do that. So I might just give a more tangible example here. So one from our Darwin Living Lab. You may or may not know, but the nationwide House Energy Rating Scheme was developed by CSIRO, and our CSIRO Energy Research Unit continues to improve and update the energy rating tools used by industry. Our partners in Darwin highlighted the importance of understanding thermal comfort performance in homes. So it's not just about energy efficiency in Darwin. They wanted to look at how you get knowledge of how hot individual rooms would get, particularly the living area and the bedrooms, because they have, very different functions. Like everyone wants a good night's sleep in Darwin. So what we did was, in short, is we developed with our partners an updated industry tool. So the all the kind of calculations and the bits that would come through a energy rating certificate, we updated that so that you could get information about the living room performance and also the worst performing bedroom under conditions of not using air conditioning. So it allows improved home design to kind of evolve through that process of design being put forward to undertake the process of getting an energy rating certificate. And then, that information comes back and it says, well, you've got a real hot box, in your third bedroom. So let's actually change the design and get a better outcome for that home in that particular part of Australia. The update of the tool is kind of being, I guess, tested a bit further, and then it'll be rolled out further in the future, we hope.
Yeah, it's actually incredible. As planners, we just often pick up controls, but to actually understand in that scenario the depth of research that is actually occurring on the ground by your agencies. Yeah, it's fantastic. It really is incredible. Just love this level of collaboration that your program is really fostering. You've touched a little bit on the Sydney Science Park Lab, which was the first one to be established, and you partnered with the developer, as you said, Celestino. How did you actually just start the program and get this thing off the ground? Did they come to you? Did you go to them?
So I talked about some of the research that we've done along the way. So we started a collaboration with Celestino back in 2014. And one of the things we explored together was this question, how do we get more innovation into how we build our, cities and suburbs? At the same time, we were also looking at techniques and frameworks to better prepare our cities for the interrelated challenges. So we started undertaking some exercises looking at future scenarios for, I think we did 5 different capital cities around Australia. And so that the scenario kind of process, it's not about predicting the future, but it's about what if you had these conditions, what sort of plausible future directions would you start heading in? And those processes kind of help you to understand where there's overlapping challenges and potential trade-offs that would need to be made between might be energy or water. And at the moment we're talking about data centers and AI and the increased energy demand for having those things in our lives. And so data centers going in and they're needing to be cooled, and cooling by water is much cheaper than cooling using more electricity. So there's things that kind of evolve where you kind of think, well, we may have a challenge if we go down this path. And so through, I guess, those combined efforts, we were talking with government partners, we were talking with industry partners. We kind of were seeking those longer term relationships and partnerships. So the relationship with Celestino was kind of there because we had similar interests. And then they sort of worked towards, setting the foundations for the Sydney Science Park as a larger project within the context of Western Sydney. Yeah, so we developed a relationship with them to kind of stand this thing up. But yeah, we talked to, numerous other, industry developers. We had a couple of, goes with another developer to set up some innovation precincts, one in Adelaide, one in Melbourne. Yeah, so conversations continue, but they take a bit to get off the ground. You're looking for a longer term commitment. And I think just looking where how things have evolved for us is, our partnership in the Darwin Living Lab has kind of been around Darwin is a hot place. It's only getting hotter. So how can you cool the city? And I think at the time we were working with stakeholders in Darwin. Cyclone Marcus came through and it took out what we now know to be a third of their tree shade. And so there was this kind of real need to take action and to look at how you make Darwin a more comfortable place. So there was momentum there to change and to take action. But I think for the context in Western Sydney is that, it's a place that is changing, and we were lucky enough to find a partner in Celestino that wanted to leave a legacy for Western Sydney. And so there's an incentive there to do things differently. So that's really worked out well for us.
You said that these things are difficult to get off the ground. What are the key obstacles that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, look, I think the key obstacle really is there that, that long-term commitment between partners, just the inability to kind of write a contract that says we're going to commit a certain amount of funding or participate in something for 10 years. And we're not very good at doing that normally. Like we'll kind of be, right, we've got 3 years to do this and here's the tasks that are going to be performed. And so then you develop your contract. But I guess what we've been able to do with the Darwin Living Lab is kind of implement some mechanisms where you kind of have the right governance of how you operate things, and that shared governance can actually make some decisions, necessary decisions, 3 or 5 years down the track, and they can update a research plan, or they can reassess the goals of the partnership and its directions. So that's kind of one challenge to overcome. And I think the second one that we're really coming up against consistently is improved ways for government and industry to collaborate and to co-design together. So there's issues around perceived conflict of interest and probity, which require constant navigation. And so, that's one I think we hope that we do learn some better processes to navigate, how industry and government, kind of come together and can try things, new ways of doing things together.
When there is a breakthrough, an innovation breakthrough, let me just term it like that, how is the intellectual property managed between the CSIRO and your partner, your collaborator?
Yeah, so I think it's different, for whatever innovation you're talking about, putting that up front. But we, as I said before, we're in the business of trying to share as much information as openly as possible. So in some ways, we're kind of agnostic to the innovation that's tried and tested. And so I guess we can have a responsibility there of providing trusted, sort of measurement and assessment of, how something performs. But if there's a CSIRO kind of background, intellectual property, something that's brought in, that would just be managed as a kind of separate arrangement, where you've got this kind of project or experiment that's got its own sort of conditions, and that would be managed appropriately. But the intention is that we always share as much as possible. And even if it's not the nuts and bolts of the total detail, that's fine. As long as we're sharing, I guess, the important learnings and, some of that important information for others to, to take up and learn from.
You mentioned earlier, the importance of engagement. And I know when we were preparing for the podcast, again, you were talking about some wonderful community education initiatives, particularly that you were employing out at the Sydney Science Park Lab. Can you share with us a little bit more about the types of programs, education and community engagement programs that you are pursuing? Because they're obviously fundamental to generating new urban outcomes. I mean, and change is always difficult, but education is fundamental to, I guess, change and to managing change. And I'd love you to share some of them, because I particularly the ones with the schools, I thought they were just incredible.
Yeah, I think it goes back to number 3 point of our strategic items. So yes, there's education's important, and I think there's different levels of education as well. In both Darwin and Sydney Science Park, there's a strong emphasis on connecting with schools, and this also aligns with STEM education initiatives. So the Sydney Science Park STEM Schools Challenge is something that we've helped to develop with Celestino, and this year it's celebrating its 5th year. So this is a program that involves around 1,600 students from over 20 schools across Western Sydney, and even out as far as Dubbo in New South Wales. And so the students spend a whole term in a sort of hands-on, place-focused, immersive learning program that takes them to the site itself. It expands their knowledge of the complexity of urban environments and allows us to communicate, I think, the important message that their generation are highly valued as part of coming up with the new solutions for our, improved future outcomes. So an amazing program, communicating with so many of the next generation and trying to value their ideas that they do come up with as well. And I guess in Darwin, we had this context of chalking the city as an engagement process where we could go out, to a place, and we could engage the local community and interested stakeholders to kind of have a look at how their urban plan is. So suggest ways that they could kind of rejuvenate or find places to plant a tree and make it cooler. And so this concept of putting some chalk on the footpath and saying, how about a tree here? That would be great. And so we've done that a couple of times. One engagement has been at the Royal Darwin Hospital, and so there's a program there that's being led by some of the hospital staff there to kind of green the hospital and make it easier to kind of walk from an asphalt car park that's 500 metres away and to kind of get to their workspace, and for those visiting the hospital as well. And yeah, just like some of our outputs. So we've just released we call it an ebook, which is called Focus on Darwin. So it takes a look at Darwin from the context of, what are sort of 5 important stories for Darwin. And so we look at urban heat, we look at how much water it takes to cool the city, some of the questions around, working towards net zero and what's the context there. And so we've kind of written that in a way that we hope is easy for most people to understand. We try and, I guess, make sure some of our outputs are just in a bit more common language. And then, running a stall at the Royal Darwin Show. So being in places, having conversations around, sharing some of our learning to the general community is part of what we're looking to do.
I love those initiatives. I particularly love the one about chalking the city. That in itself could be a great exercise that could be rolled out, by so many councils as part of, I guess, placemaking exercises. And so I'm not sure whether you've packaged it up into a technique or anything that planners can access. But if you haven't, it would be a great one.
Well, you can visit our website. So it's research.csiro.au. And it'll be /Darwin Living Lab, or it'll be /SSP Living Lab. We try and share some of these approaches that we're undertaking, and so they're available, for people to access. And we're kind of, looking to be part of this innovation ecosystem in Australia.
Well, I think that might be a great time to bring the podcast to a close. I know that you are going to have a lot of people very excited by your keynote address at Congress. Thank you so much, Dr. Tim Muster, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Belinda, for your time. It's great to be involved. I'm looking forward to the Congress and to seeing hopefully lots of other people up in beautiful Darwin.
If you haven't been to a Congress before, I encourage you to seize the moment and make your way to Darwin. To learn more, go to the Congress events page of the PIA website. If you have any questions, please email congress@planning.org.au. To hear more from the Congress podcast series or to listen to our regular podcast, follow the UrbanTalk feed in your app of choice and leave a review to help others find the podcast. If you're a developer or planner who needs help with community engagement, then get in touch with us at urbantalk.com.au. I'm Belinda Barnett, and thank you for listening to the Planning Congress 2025 podcast.